A new world driven by new media.
This is a very peculiar moment in media history.
Nobody can force me in 2011 to watch whatever I don't want to watch.
Analyzing the media's role in shaping modern history. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Throwing a few developments out of Libya this hour. The United Nations Security Council due to set out measures against Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime. That draft resolution calls for an arms embargo and an assets freeze. Got to be said, though, much of Libya is believed to be out of Gaddafi's control at the moment. His grip on power may soon be confined only to the capital. Protests also taking place in Washington, D.C. And there is Monica Villamizar. We'll see her in a moment. There she is, outside the White House. Noisy protest, looks like, Monica.
Well, Kamal, a few dozen people have gathered here in front of the White House. I just want to show you and our viewers a little bit of what the atmosphere is like here. As I said, a few dozen people. They're from Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, and also Lebanon. And joining me here to explain a little bit of why they have taken this rally to the front of the White House is Ayub. He's a human rights activist. Ayub, what is the message that you want to give to President Obama? I mean, I assume you want to give him a message since you're right here.
Well, the president's message needs to be that the Arab people, the Arab American community, is united, and we stand with our brothers and sisters on the ground in the Middle East. We need to see true democracy, true change in the Middle East, North Africa region, and we need to see the end of all oppressive tactics used by these regimes. And we need to see human rights and universal human rights implemented and given to these people. And we need to see America play a fair hand and moving forward.
What is your reaction to the announcement that there will be some sanctions to the Gaddafi regime?
That's a good first step, but there needs to be a lot more in remedying the situation in Libya. I mean, we have individuals still being shot at. You have individuals and protesters who took the streets peacefully and are facing oppressive tactics. They're facing violence. They're facing, and some of them have died at the hands of the regime. There's mercenaries, so we really need to see a lot more done than just a few sanctions.
The Arab American community is very, very big in the United States. Why are there, fewer people than we would expect in this demonstration?
Well, I don't think there's fewer people. I think there's a lot on the way. But at the same time, the Arab American community does have rallies going on across the country. Washington, D.C. is not the only one. Today there's rallies in Chicago and Miami, on the West Coast, and across New York and in the Midwest. So I don't think, there's small rallies. I think we've taken the streets in a national day of unity and a national day of solidarity for the community.
Mr. Ayub, and lastly, can you explain to our viewers what you were telling me earlier about the fact that here it's not about nationality? You were telling me that all the rallies have been combined.
The rallies are not about nationality. The rally is about unity, about solidarity, and about the Arab people, especially in the U.S., coming together and standing for what's right. And it's time for national unity and national Arab unity, not only in the U.S., but across the world as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And Kamal, this rally is going to march to the State Department, where they hope to have their voice heard in front of American dignitaries who are not working today, but at least symbolically get a message to the State Department.
Hey, Monica, just a quick word, if you could, on the sanctions issue, which you were discussing with Mr. Ayub. Just expand on exactly what the U.S. is planning, the sort of tough talk that they're coming out with.
Well, President Obama announced a series of sanctions. The most important ones are financial sanctions. They said they're going to freeze assets of Muammar Gaddafi, his clan, that is to say his family, his sons, and most importantly, high-ranking officials, Libyan officials, in hopes that this would isolate Gaddafi and that it will prompt them to defect at some point. They also announced a travel ban. They don't want them to leave, again, in the hopes of isolating him further. And they announced as well that they want the International Criminal Court to eventually prosecute Muammar Gaddafi for war crimes and those who are still part of the regime, Kamal.
Thanks, Monica. Monica Villamizar at that protest outside the White House in Washington, D.C. Well, this uprising in Libya could shed new light on the murder of a dissident in London. It is thought the Libyan Secret Service was to blame. Now his daughter is hopeful that the apparent crumbling of Gaddafi's power will help uncover what really happened.
In a street in West London, I meet Ashur Shamiz outside the shop where his friend died. It was 1995 when Ali Abu Said was stabbed to death. He'd already fled Libya years before and was a constant critic and an active opponent of Colonel Gaddafi's regime. His friends say they have no doubt his murder was ordered by Muammar Gaddafi.
They had a policy of vengeance, of taking vengeance over all the people who did something against them or who were working against them. In fact, we were all suspects. We were all on the list of liquidation by the Gaddafi people.
The British spy David Sheller, who was jailed for leaking secret documents, revealed that the UK security agency MI5 suspected Libyan government involvement in Mr Abu Said's death, but couldn't prove it. Mr Abu Said's family say the unravelling of Gaddafi's regime may provide them with the answers they desperately need.
We haven't been able to grieve properly because we've never found out or been able to put my father's case to rest. So I'm hoping with the new changes and what's happening in Libya that we'll soon be able to find out exactly what happened, who's responsible, whether they're dead or alive, but at least know that we've pursued it to the nth degree.
When police first investigated the killing, they played down the possibility that this was a politically motivated murder. But since then, it's been passed to New Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist unit. Detectives have visited Egypt and Switzerland to follow up leads. They say the case is still very much open and any new information will be investigated. Harry Smith, Al Jazeera, London.
Got to tell you about protests elsewhere in the region because they go on. Yemen, where the president is facing growing pressure to resign, with some key tribal leaders announcing their support for the anti-government movement. They include members of the Hashid tribe, which is considered the country's most powerful. Its members hold several key government positions. Here's Egypt now, where presidential terms may be limited to 8 years, one of the proposed changes to the constitution that will be put to a referendum ahead of elections later in the year. Meanwhile, the ruling military council has apologised after security forces beat protesters during overnight demonstrations in Cairo. It said the violence was the result of unintentional confrontations between the military police and the youth of the revolution. Thousands demonstrated in Tahrir Square on Friday, calling for a faster implementation of reforms. Bahrain, where a cabinet reshuffle by the king has done little to satisfy the thousands of anti-government protests there. Demonstrators gathered at Pearl Roundabout in Manama. They then marched along a major highway, blocking off traffic. Police were deployed, didn't intervene though. But it comes as a prominent leader from the country's Shia opposition arrived home from exile. In his absence, Hassan Mashema was being tried for allegedly plotting a coup. But according to Bahrain's foreign minister, he's now been granted a royal pardon. And in Algeria, hundreds of protesters have been marching again to demand the resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Earlier this week, the government ended the country's 19-year state of emergency, but demonstrations are still banned in the capital, Algiers. Just a few other world stories to tell you about. Iraq's largest oil refinery has been closed following an attack which killed at least 2 workers. Part of the Baiji complex, located around 250 kilometres north of Baghdad. Gunmen infiltrated the refinery in the middle of the night. The shutdown threatens to increase electricity shortages. Israel's Fine Gael opposition parties claiming victory after early election results put them on course for a combined record majority with Labour. Exit polls from Friday's vote shows Fine Gael on 36% of the vote, Labour on 20.5%. The former ruling party Fianna Fáil looks set for a crushing defeat as voters gave their verdict on the Ireland bailout package. And engineers in New Zealand say at least a third of the buildings in central Christchurch must be either demolished and then rebuilt after Tuesday's earthquake. The death toll there has now reached 145, with more than 200 people still missing. Search teams from 6 countries are helping local rescuers. No survivors found, though, since Wednesday. Your headlines, the latest from Libya now as the battle for control of the country rages. The United Nations Security Council is meeting to consider measures against Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime. The draft resolution calls for an arms embargo and an asset freeze, also calling for a travel ban. Tripoli braced for more violence, though, after residents said the regime is arming civilian supporters to set up checkpoints and quell any dissent. Also getting reports of dozens severely wounded after a pro-Gaddafi battalion opened fire near Sabrata in western Libya. Much of the rest of the country in the hands of Gaddafi's opponents, though. Many banks have reopened in Benghazi as the coalition now running the eastern city works to get life back to some sort of normal. New videos emerged from the eastern city of Al-Bayda showing one of Muammar Gaddafi's palaces. Parts of it destroyed during the unrest as protesters tried to take over the city and drive out the pro-Gaddafi forces. The palace had iron doors leading to underground tunnels which are said to extend for several kilometres. Elsewhere in the region, a prominent leader from Bahrain's Shia opposition has arrived home from exile. In his absence, Hassan Mshama was being tried for allegedly plotting a coup, but the foreign minister says he's now been given a royal pardon. Meanwhile, several government ministers in Bahrain say they have been sacked. In Egypt, the Judicial Committee changing the constitution has proposed cutting presidential terms to 4 years with a 2-term limit. The proposals will eventually be put to a national referendum. Meanwhile, Egypt's ruling military council had to apologise after military police beat protesters during demonstrations in Cairo. It stressed it did not and would not issue orders to attack protesters. Also ordered the immediate release of all those arrested on Friday night. Ireland's Fine Gael opposition party claiming victory after early election results put them on course for a combined record majority with Labour. Exit polls show Fine Gael on 36% of the vote, Labour on 20.5%. The former ruling party, Fianna Fáil, looks set for a crushing defeat as voters gave their verdict on the IMF EU bailout package. And engineers in New Zealand say at least a third of the buildings in central Christchurch must be demolished and rebuilt after Tuesday's earthquake. The death toll there now at 145, more than 200 still missing. Search teams from 6 countries are helping local rescuers. No survivors, though, found since Wednesday. Those are your headlines on Al Jazeera. Listening Post is next.